You can't move for politics in Edinburgh. Whether it's a practical guide to democracy for kids, or a big-name politician with more time on his hands than he would have wished for, politics is everywhere. And in Scotland you don't get much bigger than the Scottish National Party's Alex Salmond, former First Minister of the Scottish Parliament and, until 3 months ago, MP for Gordon. It has not taken long for Salmond to occupy himself since his shock defeat in May. A few days before his first show on the Fringe, Salmond is confident, promising a riot of conversation with special guests, music and a no-holds-barred QA. "We've just announced we're putting on 2 extra shows," Salmond says. One ticket reached £500 on the black market. "I thought at that point we'll have to do something about this. We sold out over 10 days ago 15 performances in a 350-seater venue." Simon Hatton Stone photobombs Alex Salmond and David Davis. Photograph Murdo MacLeod for The Guardian. I ask if he's nervous. No, I'm not really. I probably have more nerves than when making a speech in the Commons. But I've always said that the reason I didn't get nervous speaking in the Scottish Parliament or House of Commons was because when I was a wee laddie I used to be a boy soprano, singing in the biggest venues around Scotland. Wow, I say. I never knew that. He sounds affronted. You never knew that? Do your research, my boy, do your research. If you've sung in front of thousands of people when you're 11, it's difficult to get fazed. It's one of the reasons I've always been a strong advocate of kids performing. It gives them great self-assurance. Could he have done this show if he was still in Parliament? Remember, it is called Alex Salmond Unleashed, which gives you an indication of the things he'll say in the show that I certainly couldn't have said if I was the First Minister, and probably not as an MP either. Aisha Hazarika, former special advisor to 3 Labour leaders, is back for a second successive year with a one-woman show, State of the Nation. Rather than bigging herself up, she tends to small herself down. "I start by saying, I was a special advisor and worked with Gordon Brown, Ed Miliband and Harriet Harman. That was a fucking massive success. I establish early on that I've got a terrific track record of political failure." Hazarika says that just about every performer on the Fringe wants to talk politics this year. For a long time at Edinburgh, people talked about the personal rather than the political. There were loads of shows about relationships. If you wanted to talk about politics, people would steer you away from doing so. It was like that doesn't sell at the Fringe. But now everyone is talking about politics. How does that affect her? Oh, it's a nightmare. Get off my turf. Much of Hazarika's show is about her political existential crisis. As a special advisor, she was regarded by the party establishment as a loony lefty, endlessly rabbiting on about equality. These days, she says, she's regarded by the left as a closet Tory. Most comedy, she says, comes from a sense of being an imposter. Tory stand-up Jeff Norcott with left-winger Aisha Hazarika. Photograph Murdo MacLeod for The Guardian. Were in a bar with her right-leaning comedian friend Jeff Norcott, who suffers a similar sense of displacement. He is dismissed as a Tory apologist by the left and a woolly liberal by the right. Like Hazarika, he says, imposter syndrome is at the heart of much of his comedy. His show, right-leaning but well-meaning, is very funny, not least when he explains how he got himself a slot on Question Time. "Let's be honest, I've done all right to get 58 people into this porta cabin. How the fuck have I blagged my way onto the nation's flagship political debate program? We know what, don't we? There are quite a few left-wing comedians. They needed a right-wing comedian. As a straight, white middle-aged man, I took advantage of a diversity quota. These days, it is almost impossible to be an extremist political comedian because you can't outdo reality. Politically, Hazarika and Norcott say they share much in common. He is on the left of the right, she is on the right of the left. And it is this center ground that is becoming fertile territory in comedy as they try to make sense of their place in a world where populism reigns. Traditionally in comedy you either punch down or punch up. We're punching ourselves, Norcott says. It's noon, early in the day for an Edinburgh show. But perfect for Kidocracy, an interactive show that invites young children from the age of 6 upwards to devise their own utopia, or otherwise. There are only about 10 children in the audience, but encouraged by the ancient Irish wizard Brehon, they make enough noise for many more. Brehon, kitted out in full druid regalia, introduces them to Kidocracy, the island they will get to rule because the grown-ups have made such a mess of the world. Children get to govern the world on Kidocracy Island. Photograph Murdo MacLeod for The Guardian. It's a canned response show in which he puts the audience to work. What do they know about Ireland? What do they know about leadership? Who is the leader of the free world? Donald Duck, Dumbo, or Donald Trump? He asks the children if they voted for Trump. When they say no, he asks why and gives them a multiple choice answer. Because he is A poo head, B a poo head, C an American. Correct answer, all three. He then shows a picture of Theresa May and asks who she is and whether they voted for her. The kids correctly identify her as the Prime Minister and say they didn't vote for her because they are too young. In the new model kidocracy, any child will be allowed to stand as leader and everybody will be allowed to vote. Over the next hour, they elect a leader. The winning manifesto promises a society in which everybody can sell and steal as much as they like and there is infinite chocolate. Create a constitution in which people who misbehave are thrown into the toilet bowl and parents are only allowed on the island if they become servants of the children. Tackle a moral dilemma about migration. Should they let an alien teddy bear into kidocracy and see off a threat from invading parents armed with ping pong balls? By the end, they have created a society with three pillars of kidocracy: liberty, equality and farting for eternity. Keith Farnan, who created kidocracy and plays Brehan, is a former lawyer, as are a surprising number of comics. I found law quite intimidating, he says. A lot of the people studying with me had attorney generals and lawyers in the family, and I didn't. Farnan is another outsider. I always had this idea that kids should have a basic education in politics, law and economics, so it doesn't seem so intimidating, not so elitist. Obviously, there's no real way of doing that. Then I started doing stand-up comedy for kids and toying with the idea of getting them to talk about leaders and what it means to be a good leader. Why did he go from lawyer to comedian? When you start out, there's an interest in history and questioning things. Then you realize the system isn't what you thought it might be. As a student I was getting incredibly idealistic. Then I ended up in litigation and you realize you're just balancing number sheets. So he decided to get out and save the world for the children. Australian Sri Lankan Nazim Hussain looks his audience over. There are about 40 of us sitting in a lecture hall that will hold more. He looks pleased. Wow, some brown people here. What the hell, there's another 1, 5, 6, 7. This is a personal best for me. Not that I don't appreciate everyone else here tonight. It's good to have you all here at once, though lawyer-turned-comedian Nazim Hussain. Photograph Murdo MacLeod for The Guardian. Hussain, another former lawyer, is unafraid to make his audience feel uncomfortable. His amiable nature only makes his anger more potent. He riffs on the idea that if Muslims are not portrayed as terrorists, they are seen as pedophiles and quotes an Islamophobe who told him he had read the Quran. When I said, name one chapter, this guy replied, I can name 2 chapters in the Quran. Kill all the Jews, that is a chapter title. Fine, I said. Give me another chapter title. Kill all the Americans, that's another chapter title. Later, he tells me his act is his way of trying to make sense of the world. It's getting things off my chest. It's almost like therapy for me. But it's harder to make jokes about these things because the politics we're surrounded by are so personal. Selfishly, the only way I know how to deal with it is to get it out on stage in a dark room with a bunch of strangers. Like Hazarika and Norcott, he thinks satire has become virtually impossible. People used to be shy to come out and hate publicly, whereas now it's just game on. You can say what you want. Nothing is too outrageous anymore. Comedy tries to find something that is not necessarily absurd and explain and unpack that idea and show it for its stupidity, but now the stupidity just flies free. It's so difficult as a comedian to make fun of this stuff. Hussain admits he doesn't particularly like gigging in Edinburgh. The Fringe is overwhelmingly white. But comedy in much of Britain is mixed. My shows in London are packed with mixed audiences. I feel my show does better in cities where real people live, as opposed to cities where people travel to visit an arts festival. Comedy for me is visceral, it's real, it's personal, it's not talking about abstract ideas. So I feel my show resonates best with an audience with some experience of being different, too. Not necessarily ethnically different, whether they identify as gay or LGBTQ or refugees, just different. Sunday afternoon, and the paparazzi are out in force for Alex Salmon's sellout debut. Salmon takes to the stage and there is a mighty roar. This is a love-in, and he knows it. The man on my right says as far as I'm concerned HES a God. The woman on my left says HE's brought us to the point where we believe in ourselves. Salmond introduces us to the band, does a mildly diverting riff on Scottishness and William Wallace, then introduces his guest and friend David Davis MP as possibly the next Prime Minister. There is a shocked silence. Are we allowed to hiss, whispers the woman by my side. As for the show's title, he could be had under the Trade Descriptions Act. This Alex Salmond could not be more sheathed. They exchange insipid anecdotes about the worst thing they have done, and gentle inanities about Brexit, while Davis pretends he has been given the roasting of his life. In counting. This is the 5th time you've tried to lose me my job, he says when Salmond asks him for an exclusive about Irish border posts. The show is lazy, controlled and unrevealing, and is duly panned by the press. A few hours afterwards, Salmond's communications manager rings me to say how upset he is that The Guardian's comedy critic Brian Logan has reviewed the show without their knowing. That is the nature of criticism, I explain. Yes, but we thought it was going to be you, he says. And I think he will get more out of the show. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, ident. But the Salmond show does serve a purpose. It throws into relief the industry, talent and artistry that has gone into everything else I have seen. The only act that rivals Salmond on the ticket sell-out front is stand-up Dave Johns, who is better known as the eponymous hero of the Ken Loach film Daniel Blake. Johns' show, I Film Star, is a hilarious and emotional account of how the film transformed his life. Ladies and gentlemen, it made me a film star at the age of 62. I'd been a stand-up comic for 30 years, and the one thing I realized in all those years was every time I walked on stage nobody knew who the fuck I was. I mean, if it'd been a spy that would have been a brilliant career. Hilarious, old-fashioned stand-up Dave Johns performs his act, I Film Star. Photograph Murdo MacLeod for The Guardian. This is old-fashioned stand-up, so much of the humor is in the language, and the pauses. Johns talks about life growing up in a working-class family in Byker, Newcastle. We had an upright piano, sometimes we'd sit round it, whole family, wishing some fucker could play it. He's at his funniest talking about mingling with the Alistairs at award ceremonies. The thing about working class people is when they're out of their depth, there are two ways they react: they either talk and ain't shite or they get pissed. And there was no bar open. Johns was up for Best Actor at the London Evening Standard Film Awards, but Hugh Grant beat him to it. He came up and said, "You should have won that." I said to him, "Well, give us it then." And he laughed. And I went, "No, I mean it." Meryl Streep stops him and says Daniel Blake and tells him how amazing he is. He doesn't know what to say or do. She turned back round and I started sniffing her. I didn't know I was doing it. She just smelled so nice. He finally gets to the bar, sees Streep in the corner, wants to say something friendly but is unsure what. So he just shouts across the room, "Meryl. Meryl, it's all free at times." Johns looks on the verge of tears. It's not surprising. This is one of the unlikeliest, most uplifting stories you will ever hear. If I can become a film star at 62, hold on to your dream of writing that book or climbing that mountain, he tells the audience. If I can do it, so can you. Nearly every other political act one have seen has moved me and made me laugh with their pessimism. Johns has done both with his optimism. Thanks Dave, you really are a star.